Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story begins in the old neighborhood of the town of Pyongyang. A little girl with beautiful pink hair was walking down the streets. Her name was Guchu, and she was the biological daughter of the abused protagonist. Guchu was also a genius hacker. A year ago, she moved into the new world of the tragic novel and became the 5-year-old biological daughter of the main woman, Gumansi. And then, finally, she gets to the point in the story where the Jiao family comes to have the opportunity to own a woman, and Gumansi returns home. Guchu went to the open door and began to eavesdrop on the conversation. There, a girl turned to Mansi and said that she was indeed her biological mother. In fact, she even had a paternity test. She explained that it was all her mother's fault. They were only 5 years old at the time, and she had failed to look after her properly. That's why she was kidnapped. At this time, Gumansi, who had the female lead in the story, was standing in the room. The older woman looked at the young girl and wondered if she could give her mother another chance to make things right. That woman was Tang Chengshui. She was the biological mother of the protagonist. And when she took the girl's hand, she suggested that she should go back to Jiao's family with her mom and live a good life. She also added that her father and brother and sister miss her. When the girl heard this, she started to have a lot of doubts. In fact, in the original novel, after the main character was kidnapped, she was accidentally adopted by a poor foster mother. The foster mother treated the girl very well before she passed away. And in order to pay for the treatment of even the seriously ill foster mother, the protagonist had no choice but to go into the entertainment industry. Sun Chen, a major entertainment magnate and the main male character, discovered that Gumansi is very much like his first love. And that's why he gave her a rather large amount of money in exchange for her becoming his contract mistress. Eventually, the girl agreed, for she had to cure her foster mother. And in the short time they spent together, Gumansi fell in love with this dangerous and mysterious man. However, with the return of Sun Chen's first love and the death of her gravely ill foster mother, devastated by the double blow, Gumansi decided to leave her boyfriend, go into hiding, and run away with her future child. She ended up giving birth to a daughter, Guchu, all by herself. It was a very beautiful and sweet little girl, and Gumansi went back to her foster mother's house. By that time, she had already gone to school, and one day when she returned, she went straight to her mother, telling her that she was already back. Also, smiling, the little girl told her mother that her tummy was very hungry, and she would like to drink some milk. In fact, the girl was incredibly uncomfortable with the fact that her adult soul was in a small body, and she had to behave in such a way. Guchu entered the room just as the girl's mother was there, and on seeing the old lady, she immediately turned to her and inquired who she was in general. Gumansi, smiling, turned to her daughter and told her that this was her own grandmother, and added that it would be very nice if she started calling her that. Guchu smiled and said hello to her grandmother, calling her by that name. The woman turned to her daughter and asked whose child it was. Gumansi patted her girl on the head and said that Guchu was her child, and she had already turned 5 this year. Tears came to the eyes of the old woman, and she put her hand on her daughter's face and said that her good child, Faithful, had suffered a great deal over the years, and added that she knew very well that she had been through a great deal. Then she also told her daughter that she would definitely send a car tomorrow to pick her and her daughter up and transfer her to the Jiao family. The woman also said that from now on, no person would ever again be able to insult her or Gucha in any way. When the woman heard this, she couldn't believe her happiness. She did not expect that when her mom showed up, things would finally happen like this. But as she turned around, the woman started to leave and said that everything would be fine. Her mom would get ready, and they should get ready before the evening. She also added that she would be the first to leave and wished them a good day. Guchu certainly didn't trust this elderly lady, however. She was only a child, so she couldn't do anything about it. So soon, she and her mother gathered and went out into the courtyard to see the new member of the family off. The woman had already gotten into the car, and after saying goodbye to them, Gumansi told her to drive carefully. Chengshui smiled at them some more for a while, and after that, she looked straight at her driver and told him in a deafeningly cold voice to go already. As the car pulled away, Guchu turned to her mother and wondered if she really wanted to go to their new grandmother's house. She also said that she thought this grandmother was very cruel and very even suspicious. Gumansi wiped the crumbs from her daughter's face and told her that the woman was her birth mother and she wanted to return to spend time with her and her family. The girl then asked if it was true that the grandmother's family was quite rich. The woman said that it was true. They were very rich and also a bit famous in the capital. Guchu, upon hearing this, immediately smiled and said that if Grandma's family was so rich, she didn't understand why they didn't find them early. She also said that she was 5 years old after all, and her grandmother had just now decided to find them. What she was really thinking was that if her grandmother had really wanted to find them, she would have done it a long time ago, so her mother should think about those words. However, Gumansi only smiled, stroked her daughter's head, and said that she was her grandmother's biological daughter, and as a mother, she definitely couldn't harm her own child, so she shouldn't worry so much. Guchu didn't argue with her mother anymore, but she realized that her compassionate nature made them fall into every trap from humans, so it was no wonder she had been treated so horribly in the original story. In fact, in the original novel, Tang Chengshu apparently really wanted Gumansi to recognize her origins. However, in reality, she only wanted to marry the girl off to an old, rich man. Naive Gumansi was tricked and forced to marry a fat old man in his 40s, and she ended up being very quickly winded to death. And her poor daughter Guchu ended up alone and living on the streets until she starved to death. So this time, when another girl entered her body, she wasn't going to let a similar story happen again. The girl looked at her mother and realized that she didn't look like someone who could handle everything alone, so she was going to help her. And finally, the next day came. The girl and her daughter packed all their things and went to the house of her biological mother. They were being driven by a man Chengshui had sent specifically to pick them up. He turned to Miss and said that she could take a nap in the car too, since they still had a few hours before they finally reached the capital. Guchu was eating a cake at that moment. She turned to the driver and asked if her grandmother and other relatives could really love her and her mother. The man immediately laughed and said that, of course, since Madame was the woman's biological daughter, so she just couldn't help but love her. He also said that Madame was incredibly happy when she finally found the lost child, and Chao's family was overjoyed that the girl would finally return. Guchu listened to him attentively, and afterward asked him why, if grandmother loved them so much, she did not send an airplane, but made them travel such a long distance by car. Guchu also added that she could watch TV in just 2 hours, because that's how long it would take on an airplane, and she wouldn't even have to sleep. The man did not expect such questions at all, so he was very worried, and then said that perhaps the tickets were all sold out, because the capital tickets are in rather high demand among people. At that moment, the girl was approached by her mother and, smiling, said that Granny probably wanted to bring them to the capital inconspicuously, so she decided to avoid unnecessary attention around them. Of course, Guchu didn't believe it and thought to herself that she had implied so much that this woman didn't really want to see them much, and there was no way her mom could understand that. But from that moment on, several hours passed. The day was already in full swing, and finally the car pulled right up to Chao's residence. As soon as they entered, the two of them were met by a young girl. She turned to Gumansi and told them to follow her, for the master and madam were already waiting for them. They soon entered the dining hall, and Chengshui, when she saw them, was immediately excited and said hello, saying that she was very happy that they had finally arrived. She went over to her daughter and, taking her hand, told them to come in and sit down already, for they had just recently prepared lunch. Guchu continued to stand back and watched it all. She thought to herself that if the woman really wanted to act like this, she could give them some space to show their so-called love. But she wanted to also be given time to see who she might end up approaching, so the girl stood back and began to look around the entire dining hall. At the very end sat a rather serious man. It was Chao Qing. He was the father of the main character. This grown man looked very serious, so the girl didn't understand who it was that he was even going to scare in this way. Next to him sat Chao Yang. He was the brother of the protagonist. Guchu also remembered from the original novelization that he was the only good person in the family, and in the future he would even become a billionaire general, super rich, so the girl had to hang on to him. So the first thing she did was walk up to the man and tap him on the arm. He immediately took notice of her. As soon as Chao Yan turned his head in her direction, he immediately saw his niece's sweet face. She said hello to her uncle and asked him to hug her. Guchu, when she looked at his huge, watery eyes, immediately realized that they reminded her of someone very much. She didn't have time to realize who it was that looked like him after all, though, because the guy took her in his arms and asked her what her name was. The girl immediately introduced herself and said he could just call her Choo-Choo. She also said that her name was just like the story of first love. When Chao Yan heard this, he was very surprised and asked how old she was, what she could possibly know about this work. Choo-Choo replied that she learned it from watching TV, and of course she knows what first love is. The girl, looking him straight in the eye, told him that first love is when the first person you like reciprocates and you start a relationship. She then asked her uncle if he had had a first love, and the man, laughing, said that presumably he had indeed. Choo-Choo couldn't believe that he still keeps her guessing about different things, because she knows for sure that he has a first love, and that person is the famous streamer Kit. However, it's not long before his parents are against him being with Kit. At that moment, another person suddenly came into the room. She had pink hair and, turning to her mother and father, asked if her sister Muncie had returned. This stranger was Chao Mansi. She was the youngest sister of the novel's protagonist. The woman immediately approached her daughter and, turning to Muncie, asked that she allow her to introduce her biological sister. The girl immediately leaned over to Gumanzi and said, while fixing her face, that she was still gorgeous, and added that she thought her looks would be ruined by the hard life in the village for so long. Afterward, she asked her sister why her father did not come to this meeting, since she only sees her little niece. Gumanzi, smiling, replied that Choo-Choo's father had passed away rather early, so he wouldn't be at this meeting. When the woman heard this, she said that apparently her sister had had a pretty rough time before she arrived. Gumanzi was immediately wary and couldn't believe that it wasn't just some suspicions of hers. She could really feel the hostility from her sister. But Mansi ignored her silence and said that her niece was already 5 years old, which meant that she should continue her education in the capital. She then asked her mother if she had already helped her sister choose a kindergarten. The woman, smiling, said she had already chosen a kindergarten in the eastern suburbs of the capital called Royal. After that, she turned to Gumanzi and said that Choo-Choo was already 5 years old, which meant that her education shouldn't lag behind either. She explained that this daycare center was carefully chosen and the teachers there are held accountable, so she can have absolute confidence in that choice. Gumanzi was about to object to something, but the girl put a hand on her shoulder and told her sister not to worry so much. She also said that Choo-Choo is still young, and it is advisable for her to make as many friends as possible at that age because other kids her age are already learning English, which means she should not fall behind the others. Dai Chengshui put her hand on her daughter's arm and told her to listen to her, for she was still young, and in addition to taking care of the baby, she also needed to take care of herself. She told the girl to look at herself in the mirror, for she looked incredibly thin, and it made her motherly heart break. Gumanzi, after listening to all of this, thought about the fact that really Choo-Choo, she has an incredibly smart kid, and she needs to interact more and more with kids her age to socialize. She realized that the girl couldn't always stay in her room playing computer games. The Choo-Choo herself, when she heard this, was very happy that she would finally be able to go to kindergarten. In fact, in the novel, the Jiao family pretended to find a prestigious kindergarten for Guchu. In the end, Their goal was only to separate mother and daughter so that they would no longer have communication with each other. In that case, her biological mother would be able to arrange for her daughter to meet that horrible old dirty man, Mr. Lee. And besides, this kindergarten is not prestigious at all. It's more like a torture chamber. For several days in that place, Guchu was starved, causing her to become pale and very thin. Tang Chungshu purposely bribed and coerced everyone by saying that Gumansi was Mr. Lee's wife, so she wasn't allowed to pick up her daughter from kindergarten because she was now under a different surname. In that case, the kindergarten was exactly the very first cause that started the whole tragedy, so Chu-Chu realized that she had to stop it all. After a while, she looked at her uncle and said that she didn't want to go to that daycare center at all. She hugged him and told him that she would very much like to play with her dear uncle at this time. In fact, she hoped that this nice uncle could rescue her from this horrible place. In fact, his parents were merchants who worked for profit and priced everything only on favorable offers. His mother greatly despised women who lost their virtue, and humancy was lost for 18 years, and his mother never mentioned that she wanted to find her. Therefore, Chao Yan found his mother's behavior so strange when she had become so gentle and kind. He also didn't usually interfere in family affairs, but he felt that this time he had to investigate thoroughly. After lunch, she turned to her sister and said that she would take Guchu and take her to her new room, and the girl could have a slow chat with her mother. That's exactly what she did, and when Chu-Chu got to her room, she couldn't even believe that it was really all a place just for her alone. She was running from one side of the room and into the other, taking different things. The girl said it was all just beautiful, and there were lots of different dolls and toys. When Muncie saw her joy, she thought of the fact that village children were very easily deceived. A few dolls could make her completely inattentive. But in fact, Chu-Chu, when she saw the smug expression on her face, couldn't believe that she actually thought that these dolls would be able to attract her. In fact, her favorites were a computer, a black unlimited card, and a car to race around town. After a while, Muncie approached the girl and, smiling gently, asked if she even knew who her father was. Chu-Chu looked at her in surprise, not understanding the question. She was silent for a while, and afterward told her aunt that she would like to tell her a secret, but she would not be allowed to tell anyone else about it. The woman immediately sat down beside her and said that of course she could keep it a secret. When the girl moved closer to her and said that her mom had talked about her dad being a diver, Muncie, upon hearing this, was very surprised and could not believe that the father of this child actually had a legitimate job. She thought in turn that he was some gangster or madman who was always sitting in a bar. The girl quickly removed the serious expression on her face and told Chu-Chu that it was very good, and also asked that the girl tell her aunt where her daddy was currently residing. The little girl kept hugging the toy and said that her father lives in the sea. Her mom talked about how he is the best diver in the world and other divers come back after a short dive. However, her dad is not like that at all. Chu-Chu said with a smile on her face that he had been underwater diving for 5 years, and so far, he had absolutely not returned to them. When the girl heard this, she couldn't believe that she could actually believe such a story. It was obvious that Gumanzi had told this lie specifically to her child. Therefore, she also thought that surely the woman would probably never be able to give out information about Chu-Chu's biological father. The girl was just furious, however. She certainly did not show her emotions in front of the child. So she got out of bed and said that Auntie had some things to do and she could play. Chu-Chu smiled and said that there was no problem with that, since she could take care of everything, and thought to herself that it was time to remind Gumanzi that the royal kindergarten was absolutely not a good place. Soon the girl went to her computer and started searching for various information. After a few hours, she finally found what she needed. It was shocking news with various headlines about the royal nursery being an absolutely horrible place. As soon as Chu-Chu found this, she immediately ran to her bed and thought of the next thing she should do was to ask little brother if he had found the confidential information about Song Chen. She pulled a small computer out from under the bed and realized that seeing her father might provide some security for mother and daughter. Soon, the special person found the information he needed about Song Chen. As expected, there was a lot of confidential information from a major tycoon in the entertainment industry, and he gathered it in an email for her. Chuchu said that it was a great job and he had done a good job. Then the worker asked where she'd been missing lately, but when she said she was getting ready for kindergarten, of course no one believed her. Certainly, her employees were incredibly intelligent people, but she realized that no one would believe her, because she herself would hardly believe the information she heard. After a few hours, it was completely dark outside. Her mother came in and told Chuchu that it was time to put away the gadgets and go to bed. The little girl looked at Gumansi and told her mom that this computer was incredibly fun and she would like to play on it some more tomorrow. Gumansi took her daughter in her arms and told her that tomorrow she could play whatever she wanted to play. At the same moment, Chuchu pressed one button with her finger so that all the tabs on the computer minimized. The girl was very cautious about it and didn't want to let it be exposed. So the woman went to the bed, tucked her in, and told her to go to sleep first, and her mom would go turn off the computer. The girl said she didn't mind, and Gumansi looked at her as she approached the computer and thought that her daughter had probably had a lot of fun that day because she really did love sitting at the computer. And at that moment, when the woman was about to turn off the laptop, she saw a very interesting news on it, which appeared immediately after Chuchu pressed the button. There was written information about the royal kindergarten. The woman immediately began to read about it and was very surprised because it simply spoke about disgusting conditions. She immediately remembered the words of her mother who was going to send her granddaughter there and could not believe that she could praise this kindergarten like that. At that moment, Chuchu, who was holding a mouse, turned to her mother and said that they adults were incredibly fond of playing on the computer. She also said that this evening Auntie Mansi was playing on that computer too, and asked who her daddy was. When Gumansi heard this, you looked at her in surprise and couldn't believe that Jiao Mansi was using their computer. However, at least now she understood where the kindergarten records had come from, but she didn't understand why the girl was asking about Chuchu's father. The woman walked over to her daughter and told her to answer what Auntie was saying after all, when Guchu heard this question. She was very happy that her mom had finally gotten her IQ back. After all, she was not very savvy before. Then she told her mother that Auntie had also said that Chuchu was a little idiot, and her existence would ruin the Chao family's plans. And afterward, she turned to her mother with a smile on her face and wondered what it meant to be a little idiot, and wondered if perhaps that was the kind of thing you could eat. However, Gumansi, when she heard this, she was incredibly surprised and couldn't believe that she could actually name a small child like that. Chuchu was incredibly pleased with herself at this moment and thought that adding fuel to the fire was exactly her specialty. And it also pleased her that she was in a child's body, for that had its advantages, namely that absolutely no one would suspect anything on a 5-year-old child. While the woman was putting her child to bed, her birth mother was sitting on the balcony. She was on a video call with Mr. Lee and said her oldest daughter, Muncie, had just returned to the country and she had sent him a picture of her. So she asked what he thought of her appearance. The man on the other side of the call was smoking a cigar and said he was very much in love with her. Laughing, he also told the girl that he would like to marry her eldest daughter and she should not worry about anything, because from now on they would be related, and he would take care of her even in matters of business. The woman was incredibly happy about such a thing, for the Lee family was very famous in the capital, and if they could establish a connection with them, their family's business would flourish better than ever. When the conversation ended, she told the man that she would arrange a meeting with him tomorrow and added that they were now a family. Then she said goodbye to Mr. Lee and said that in that case they would see each other very soon. At that moment, Mincy came and sat down opposite her. The mother immediately turned to her youngest daughter and said that everything was settled. Then the woman, smiling, said that everything was right. An old and disgusting fat man and a very unpleasant person But her sister, who was already a widow, he would definitely be a perfect match. And then her mother turned to her and told her that she was just at the perfect age now, and she should start considering marriage options. She also said that she had observed everyone for a while and noticed that the Chen family in the capital was quite good and influential. But the girl turned to her mother with a heavy sigh and said that she didn't want to marry someone from the Chen family. With a wink, she told her that if she had to choose, she would probably choose Sun, because he is the greatest tycoon in the entertainment industry with billions in assets. She began to glow with joy as she remembered this man and said he was single and very handsome. The woman immediately laughed and said that Song Chin was indeed a very suitable candidate for marriage, so she would look for a way to introduce the two of them. Muncie thanked her immediately. That was how the day ended. The next morning, Mother and Gunminzi gathered in the dining room for breakfast. Changshui turned to her daughter and said that she would take a little time out that day to visit the kindergarten, and added that she would accompany her father to the company to familiarize herself with their Jiao family business. Gunmanzi turned to her mother and said that she would also like to accompany Chu-Chu to kindergarten, for these are quite responsible times, and she would like to be by her daughter's side. But the woman, laughing, replied that she didn't need to do that at all, because sending Chu-Chu to kindergarten was a very small thing, and getting to know the company was a big deal. She also told the girl to go and check it out for starters, and after a while they could give her some shares in their family business already. But at that moment, someone suddenly came into their room. It was Chao Yan, and he said he could accompany Chu-Chu to the kindergarten. He smiled at his mother and said that he just had a free day, so he would like to go there too. In fact, since that night, he's been feeling very uneasy, as if something was wrong. So he'd like to go too and check everything out with his own eyes. Cheng Shui immediately got up from her seat and said that he would probably be very busy with work anyway, so this was absolutely not an event that needed such a big sacrifice. The man was about to say something when suddenly all three of them heard a huge, strange sound coming from the upper room. Gumansi immediately realized that it must have come from Chu-Chu's room, so she immediately ran to her daughter's room to check what had happened there. As soon as she ran inside, she saw that the girl was lying on the floor with her knee torn up, and also there were many pieces of shrapnel around her. The girl was crying loudly because her knee was hurt, and her aunt was standing next to her. As soon as Gumanzi saw it, she immediately became wary, and the woman began to turn her head and say that it was not at all what they might have thought. The girl continued to cry at this point. Gumanzi immediately pulled her aside and told Chu-Chu not to be scared because everything was fine. She also said that she would call a doctor for her so everything would be fine. Their brother immediately turned to Muncie and in an indignant voice inquired what had happened at all. The girl realized how it might look from the outside, so she was very frightened. She said that she didn't really know what had happened. She explained that she had merely called out to Chu-Chu. She began to insist on being carried in her arms, and suddenly her arm ached sharply, so she instinctively let it go to the ground. Amunsi replied that the vase was just beside the bed and had suddenly fallen to the ground with the girl. Chu-Chu looked at her aunt with tears in her eyes and said that uncle shouldn't blame her at all. You see, she's just very sloppy. That's why it happened like that. At this moment, Gumanzi said with a heavy sigh that she was probably just a little sloppy, and also said that it was her fault for not taking care of her properly, and that was the reason why this situation happened. When her little sister heard this, she was very surprised. But at that moment, Chao Yan came up behind them. He took his new sister by the shoulders and started to lead her out of the room, saying that there might be glass stuck in Chu-Chu's leg, so he would take them to the nearest hospital to see if everything was okay. Gumansi immediately turned to him and apologized for them disturbing him, for she was really very embarrassed. At this moment, the mother turned to her youngest daughter as the door closed and said that even if she didn't tolerate this little girl, she would have many chances to abuse her later. However, right now, she believes that Gumansi doesn't fully trust them, so her actions will not only make her suspicious and cautious, but will also anger her brother and father. Munsi objected at once and said that You see, she really hadn't done it on purpose. It was a real accident. She had not gone so far as to harm a small child. However, her mother still sighed heavily and said that she would have someone clean the room, and when her sister returned, she should sincerely apologize to them. Muncie was simply furious, however. Of course she could prove nothing. At this point, they were already sitting in Grandpa Choo-Choo's car, and the girl turned to her mother, saying that her leg hurt incredibly badly. Mother replied that they were almost near the hospital, so it wouldn't be long before things got better. Then Chaoyan turned to her and asked her to tell her uncle whether she had really hurt herself accidentally, or whether it was not at all true. Choo-Choo said in a trembling voice that she had indeed hurt herself quite accidentally, and that it had nothing to do with her aunt. Tears came to her eyes because the wound was really deep, and herself at this moment she really hoped that grandfather would continue to question, for she could continue to play her part. The man was wary and asked that the girl tell him the truth and not fear any repercussions. He would definitely be on her side in case of anything. Then her mother hugged her and asked Choo-Choo if it was really just an accident, or if she just didn't want to tell them the truth. In fact, in the original story, this naive and sweet Gumansi was framed by Jiao more than once just because Jiao is better at pretending to be weak and pathetic. She kept Gumansi in the dark every time, even selling her while counting the money. However, the girl is there now, and so there is no way she will give her even the slightest chance of success. Choo-Choo at that moment immediately started hugging her mom and said that it wasn't something she could tell them. She also added that if she said that, the mom would never love her daughter again. Tears came to the girl's eyes, and she said that Choo-Choo's mom is not a little worker, and she doesn't want to be separated from her mom, nor does she want to have a new father. Then the girl said that she had been told by her aunt that she was dirty and threw her straight to the ground. When her mom heard this, she was very surprised and couldn't believe that it could really be true. In fact, Choo-Choo had never cried in her previous life, and on this day she had to cry all her tears, the ones she had not had time to shed in her previous life. The girl was completely unaccustomed to such a large display of emotion. However, if her mother still couldn't wake up and realize what was wrong, she just didn't know what else she would have to do. For a while, the girl began to ponder her daughter's words about her new father and employee. Gumansi felt that the family pushing back wasn't as kind to her as it seemed. They are just going to make a show out of their own motives. So the woman turned to her older brother and asked if he and Tang Chung-Shu were on the same side and advocating the same thoughts. The man, when he heard this, was a little surprised. He continued driving, but said that he had absolutely no intention of injuring her and did not want to do so now. After some time, they finally arrived at the hospital, and there the girl was examined and her leg was bandaged. The doctor said her parents should pay as much attention to their child as possible. He explained that such a beautiful child could have been in the greatest danger if the glass had damaged her eye or scratched her face completely. It would have ruined her life completely. Her mom immediately told the doctor that she would be as careful and considerate as possible in the future, and it would never happen again. The man, finishing his examination, told them to let the child rest well and to call him if there were any problems again. Gumansi immediately turned to her big brother and said that Tang Chung-Shui had talked about the royal kindergarten and called it the best in the capital, but the information she had seen recently on the internet. She said that if she hurt herself a little that day, it meant that the woman couldn't take her to daycare. She also said, with tears in her eyes, that their entire Chao family looked down on her really. So she wondered why he was being generous and taking her and her daughter to the hospital. In fact, she thought that her family would really be someone she could rely on, but it ended up being completely different. The Chao Yang turned to the girl and told her that it would be better for her not to return to the Chao family now. He also said that there were many empty rooms in his apartment, so she and Choo-Choo could stay there. The girl couldn't believe that he was really so kind, but she agreed to it, because when her leg healed a little, he would take her back to the city. It's small, peaceful, without all the noise of the capital. But at that moment her phone suddenly rang. She said it was Chung-Shu Tang. Her brother immediately told her not to contradict his mother just yet. Jala's family has influence in the capital. If they were to contradict, it would be very difficult for her and her daughter to get away unnoticed. The girl agreed, so she immediately picked up the phone. An elderly woman's voice came from there, and she immediately asked how the girl was doing. She also said that it was all because of their carelessness, and added that she had already instructed the servants to clean the room and hang carpets everywhere, so Choo-Choo wouldn't get hurt again. Gumansi, hearing this, thought about how she was a rather gentle and considerate mother. However, she was still not as easy to fool as before. So she told the woman that Choo-Choo had several glass shards in her leg, and the doctor said she couldn't walk yet, so she decided to stay with her in the hospital. Chung Shui was a little surprised when she heard this, but she said that it was no big deal. Taking care of the child was necessary, and she asked that the woman didn't bother much anyway. She also said that their relatives heard that she was back and were very happy, so she was going to take her to one meeting with them as early as tomorrow. However, Gumansi suggested that we talk about it the next day, since she had to take care of Choo-Choo first. After that, she hung up the phone without saying a single word. When the woman heard this, she was surprised and realized that she had to quickly arrange a meeting with Gumansi and Mr. Lee, because she thought that the girl had already begun to suspect something. The next day, Gumansi took her daughter, and they arrived at her older brother's apartment. When Choo-Choo looked around, she said that the house with her uncle was incredibly beautiful. The man thanked her for the compliment, then turned to his sister and told her that she and the girl would stay on the second floor. He would be completely at their disposal. Chow Young also said that he had already prepared a room for them, so they could stay as long as they needed. As she passed one of the rooms, Choo-Choo looked inside, and turning to her uncle excitedly, wondered if there really was an Ultraman in this room. She also asked if he really liked the character, and the man, closing the room, replied that it was the room of a friend of his who sometimes stayed there, so his things were kept there. Choo-Choo immediately started guessing and said that she understood everything because it was probably her aunt now. She herself, sighing heavily, thought about the fact that this was probably the room her uncle had prepared for the child. But in the novel, the Jiao family, when they found out about the secret relationship, sabotaged and killed the child. At this point, Gumansi turned to her daughter. She became very worried about her upbringing and asked her not to behave in such a way. Before long, Chow Yang said that he was working for the company, so he needed to leave, and also wished the two of them a good rest. The woman immediately agreed with him and thanked him for the good terms, and Choo-Choo said goodbye to her uncle. In fact, the little girl the man liked right away, so he waved her back and went to work. At this point, they went into the room, and Choo-Choo had been playing on the computer for hours and won one game again. When she told her mom about it, Gumansi stroked her head and said that it was very good and added that she would be back very soon, but in the meantime, she would go to this very royal kindergarten. The girl said there was no problem with that and also wished she had been careful on the road. Gumansi thought at this moment that if that information about this kindergarten was true, then she should see it with her own eyes, so that she could then have charges against the so-called mother. So she immediately went outside and went on her way. But suddenly she saw a car pull up. She stopped and, turning her head to the side, saw a man peering out of there. This person, of course, was Chung Shui. She turned to the girl and said that she was looking for her, and added that she had not expected to find her in this place. The woman afterward inquired if she remembered her second uncle. He had loved her more when she was very young. Her mother also said that he cried a lot of tears of joy when he heard that she had already returned. She also added that on that day, her second uncle had arrived with other relatives, so she asked that the girl go with her to meet them. But Gumansi replied to her mother that she still needed to go to the hospital to get medicine for Choo-Choo because her legs were not yet healed. Her mother immediately started crying and said it was all their fault because they were careless and accidentally dropped the Choo-Choo. So she took Gumansi's hand and said that she just wanted to do everything for her to make the woman happy. So she didn't understand how the girl could doubt her. After all, they shared blood and flesh. The girl just stood there looking at her mom for a while. Then she decided to take matters into her own hands and started pushing her straight into the car, telling her to just greet them. And it wouldn't take long. Gumansi couldn't resist any longer. Her mom just put her in the car and they drove very quickly to the meeting. Quite a few hours had passed since then, and the sun was already beginning to go below the horizon. Choo-Choo had been sitting at the computer all this time, and finally she was done. The girl stretched and decided to see what time it was. When she came to the clock, she saw that it was quite late, and she remembered that Gumansi had gone to the suburbs to see that very kindergarten. However, she should have been back by now. At that moment, she suddenly became very scared, and she immediately decided to call her mother. However, the girl told her that the number was unavailable. Choo-Choo was already incredibly worried. She realized that this was very bad. According to the original plot, Gumansi must have been stolen by the Jiao family in order to meet that awful, dirty, fat Mr. Lee. Then she quickly dialed her uncle to warn him of the danger. As soon as he picked up the phone, Choo-Choo immediately started screaming. She said her mom was missing. She said she was going to check the kindergarten in the afternoon, but she still hadn't returned. She also said she was incredibly worried because her phone wasn't even available and she couldn't reach her. Chao Yang immediately realized that things were not good, so he told the girl not to worry too much. After all, he would come soon and they would work things out. When she hung up the phone, she had no way of knowing why she had to be reborn as a 5-year-old child. All she could do was cry and look cute, nothing else. According to the original plot, Tang Chung-shu will bring a group of people to break into a room and pretend to catch her along with Mr. Lee. Thus, Gumansi's reputation will be completely ruined, and under multiple pressures, she will have no choice but to marry him. Therefore, Choo-Choo really hoped that they could find her in time, because this development was not a good thing. Soon, Uncle finally did arrive, and his driver said that they were able to track down Tang Chung-shui and found out that she was at the Empire Hotel. The man, hearing this, immediately turned to Choo-Choo and said that they were going to go and find her mother, and she had better stay in the car and not run anywhere. The girl agreed and stayed in the car, and her uncle and his assistant went to the hotel. Chao Yan was incredibly curious as to what his mother was even up to and why she had brought Gumansi to the hotel. As soon as they left, Choo-Choo unlocked the car and got to her feet. She thought about how her uncle should never leave a child in a closed car. She realized it was completely unsafe, so she followed them to the hotel. As soon as she stepped inside, she thought about the fact that Tang Chung-shui was going to catch Gumansi and Mr. Lee in a bed as far away as the 30th floor. So the girl needs to find her mom before all this happens. However, when she came to the elevator, she realized that she could not reach the right button because she was too small. When she looked to the side, she noticed some very handsome man entering the elevator. After taking a closer look, Chu realized that it was Song Chen, her biological father, and also the main male character in the story. At this point, his assistant leaned over to the girl and wondered what a little kid like her was doing alone in an elevator. Choo-Choo didn't know what she should do now. She realized that she needed this father to find what she was looking for quickly, so she needed to take the initiative. The girl immediately looked at them with a pitiful look and said that she needed to go up to the 30th floor to find her mom. However, she can't reach the button to push it. So she called the man a tall guy and asked him if he had seen her mom by any chance. She also started touching him by his very expensive jacket. When his assistant saw this, he was immediately worried about the master and ran to the girl. The boy removed her hands and apologized to the man. He also, turning to the child, said that it was their president Hermophon, and she should never touch his clothes. Then he calmly added that they would press the button for her on the 30th floor, and so he did. Choo-Choo immediately smiled and thanked them for it and said that they were very kind. Mentally, of course, she cursed her father and thought about the fact that she was his own daughter and he wasn't even paying attention to her. In the original story, Song Chen was saved from drowning as a child. He kept thinking that his savior was the opposite of the villain of the novel, and that's why he kept hurting and harming his real savior, Gumansi. But in fact, the dramatic twist of this novel is that his savior was just as much Gumansi, and he found out about it soon after. Soon the elevator arrived at the 20th floor and the men began to get off. His supervisor told him to get a new suit. Chuchu thought at that moment that her horrible father just needed to wait. She would deal with him when she was free. He had ignored her this day, but in the future, she would show him what it was like to deal with her. Soon after, the elevator finally did arrive at the right floor for the girl, and she stepped out of it cautiously, looking around. She wondered what her uncle was even doing there, and if he had saved her mom yet. Soon she began to walk farther and farther and heard a man behind her. The girl immediately assumed it was her uncle and turned around to check. But as soon as Chuchu turned around, she saw a blonde-haired boy standing in front of her. He immediately addressed her, calling her child, and asked her where her mother was and why she was alone. The girl immediately began to worry, but said that she was looking for her mom, but could not find her. She cried loudly, and the guy, when he saw all this, also started to worry and suggested that she was probably lost. At that moment, a man approached him from behind. He called him young master and said that everything had been found. Mrs. Jiao had booked a room, and there was a meeting with Mr. Li of the family to discuss business matters. Chuchu, when she saw this man, she was very surprised, not realizing who he even was, and also assumed that he must be the Chen family's only legitimate young master named Chen Kui. There isn't much description of this man in the original story, only that he was involved in a power struggle in the Chen family and died young at the hands of his father's illegitimate son. Therefore, Kui immediately ran forward and told the guy to watch the child and not let her run. His assistant was a little surprised but told the guy not to worry. Everything would be under control. Chuchu began to see him off with a glance and noticed that this whole situation looked like the young master wanted to save Gumansi. However, she wondered what the connection could be between Chen Kui and Gumansi, and also why she didn't remember that part in the original story. The girl also suggested that perhaps it was some additional hidden line. The boy was running through the corridors at this point and didn't understand how Gumansi, this woman, could be so brainless. He opened the doors to her room and didn't understand how she could be completely fooled by Tang Chongshui. Therefore, he even speculated that perhaps her intelligence had completely dropped after having a child. The man quickly ran into the room, and when he opened the door, he immediately turned to Gumansi. And when he saw her lying on the bed with the man, he became angry. This Mr. Li brazenly began to molest the girl. She tried to shove him away, but he was too big. Gumansi screamed and cried, telling him not to do it. But the man insisted and said he wasn't going anywhere, for with a beauty in his arms, he certainly couldn't just walk away. Kui immediately ran up to them and started hitting that guy so hard that he even flew aside for a few meters. The man became very angry when he felt these blows and wondered who dared to interfere with his amusement. Kui went over to the girl at this point and told her not to be so scared. It was okay. He had gotten there in time to save her. After that, the guy shifted his gaze to Mr. Li and said that he deserved to die since he could afford to treat innocent girls like that. When Mr. Li saw this young Master Chen, he was very surprised and didn't understand how he could even be in this place. But the man was also annoyed that he couldn't offend him, so he went up to my handyman and told him it was all just a misunderstanding and he had gotten it all wrong. By the time Chu had already arrived in their room, she immediately ran to her mother and happily told her that she had finally found her. Gumansi, who was still incredibly scared after what had happened, upon seeing her daughter, immediately ran up to her. She hugged her, and Chu told her mother that she missed her incredibly and was worried about her because she had been gone for a very long time. She looked at the woman's face and thought about the fact that Human C was still untouched, so she assumed that Mr. Li hadn't done anything wrong, and they had made it in time. The girl kept crying and hugging her daughter. She called her a good girl and said she missed her incredibly too. When the woman thought about the whole situation, she realized that her mother had actually tricked her into getting into the family hospitality car and ended up drugging her to get her into that bed. The woman could not believe that she had really done that. But at that moment, Choo-Choo began to smile and turned to her mother and asked why she was crying. Was she hungry? The girl also said she would give her a milk cake just to stop her from crying. Gumansi was indeed a very good mother. In her previous life, the girl who moved into the child's body was an orphan. But it was only when she found herself in this place that she could really feel what a mother's love was like. When Mr. Lee saw this child, he wondered at the woman. Did she really have a child? But he didn't understand how this could happen, because Tang Chung-shui had said that her eldest daughter was pure and innocent and had grown up abroad since childhood, so she didn't even know the real world. So she definitely couldn't be touched by anyone. At this moment, the guy who had saved Gumansi turned to the man and asked, "Did he have any problems?" The man immediately said in a trembling voice that there was nothing wrong. Gumansi turned to Kui at this point and said she was incredibly grateful to him and said she would thank him when she got the chance. But the guy ignored her words and wondered, didn't she remember him? At this moment, they heard Mother Gumansi's voice behind them, telling Xiao Yan that she was greedy and intended to contact Mr. Lee. Chung Shui also said that she came from the village, saw the rich man and wanted to take him on immediately, so she doesn't know what she can do to stop her. She looked at her son and said that Mr. Lee and Mansi were still together now, and they weren't even ashamed of it all. But the woman did not look at the bed for some time, and when at last she turned her head and saw Gumansi standing with her child in her arms, she was very much surprised. She didn't understand how that little and harmful Choo-Choo girl managed to come to this place, as well as why the Chen family's young master was also in the room. Chao Yang walked over to Gumansi at this moment and said that he was very glad that she was all right. After all, she had scared him to death. Choo-Choo immediately turned to her uncle and inquired why she had managed to find her mother before he had, and also why he was so late. But the man ignored her admiration and wondered, hadn't he told her to stay and wait for him in the car? The girl immediately laughed and answered nothing to this, for she realized that she had indeed broken her promise. At this point, Kui approached his assistant and asked that the manager call the police, for there was an incident going on at the location that involved an attempted assault on a woman with evidence and witnesses present. The man immediately told the young master that he would do everything right away, and Mr. Lee immediately started shouting in his defense. He pointed his finger at Chung Shui and said that it was exactly her fault. She had told her eldest daughter to marry this girl, so he didn't understand why they were the ones calling the police and accusing him of something. The woman also said to marry Gumansi. Choo-Choo, hearing this, looked at her mother in surprise and asked, "Is she really the bride of that ugly uncle?" She also said that she did not like that uncle at all, for he looked like a fat pig. And Choo-Choo actually really dislikes such ignorant and fat pigs. She likes normal people better.